This is our method for quick and easy sourdough bread. Thanks to our friend Katie for making this video, editing it and starring in it. We've made a few tons of bread this way over a few years, so it seems to work all right. First off, we measure out the wheat. This is wheat from our friend's farm that we've winnowed and sorted through. Otherwise, it's straight out of the header. We measure out the wheat first. This is 1 kilo of wheat for 1 litre of water, so 1 to 1. We've zeroed the scales, weigh the wheat, then we grind it in our German Schnitzer flour mill that we've added on this black plywood box to avoid getting flour all over the kitchen, especially if it's a bit windy. You always start the motor before you pour the wheat in. So the motor's going, you pour the wheat in, and it's grinding the wheat as fine as we can get it to go straight into the mixing bowl that we're going to use to make the bread. It takes quite a few minutes. When it's finished, we'll hear the mill lose the load, and we'll take it out. For each kilo, we add a couple teaspoons of salt. Mix that in dry before we add the liquid. Here's 1 litre of water measured out. Warm water in cool weather. In hot weather and summer, we'll just use cold water. Also, we change how long we'll let the bread rise for according to the weather. So here's our starter straight out of the fridge. The whole jar. It's been in the fridge a couple of days since we last made bread. And we're going to wash the whole lot out into the bread. Once the starter's mixed through the dough, we're going to half fill that jar to be the starter for our next bread. And we're going to keep that in the fridge after a little bit of time to rise first until the next batch of bread. If we're going to make bread soon, we leave it rise for a bit. If we're not going to make bread for another week, then we'll put it straight in the fridge and slow the starter down so it doesn't get so sour. We stir it up with a strong wooden spoon because we're not going to need this bread. What makes this bread so quick and easy is that you don't have to knead it. We don't have to flour a bench, we don't have to clean it up afterwards, you don't have to do much work, you just mix it until it's all wet through. About half fill the jar again, so that we can make the next batch. If you forget this stage, then you're in trouble. You're going to have to make a new starter or get one from a friend. If you're not going to be making bread for a few days, you can put the starter straight back in the fridge and it'll grow there slowly. Otherwise, you can leave it for an hour or so first. I like to put linseed in the dough itself and leave it for the rising time so the linseed starts to sprout a bit too. Once it's all mixed, then we cover the dough with a lid and put it somewhere out of the way. Up on top of the stove isn't bad. See how the dough is quite low when we first mix it? Now, 6 or 8 hours later, it's risen to probably double its volume and got softer. We grease our tins, often with butter or ghee. I like to sprinkle in sesame seeds and linseed in the bottom of the tin, as well as putting them on the top. Then we take the same spoon and stir down the dough, so breaking all the bubbles and turning it back into a solid, wet dough before we pour it into the tins. If you don't do this, you get different sorts of textures in the bread. So we just pour it out. The bread's often a bit wetter than what you see here. It pours more easily. You'll work it out. Then we put sesame seeds and linseed on the tops of the loaves, and so that they don't all just fall off in the bread box, we'll get a wet spatula and pat them all down, and that way the seeds all stick to the top of the loaf. Once the loaves are made, we leave them for usually around 25 minutes, but up to 40 minutes if the weather's cold or the starters a bit slow. We put them in a nice warm place here above our wood stove to rise. You can see the fire. Once they've risen, I always use a timer for the rising, and then I use a timer again for the cooking. See how full these tins are now compared to how they were before they rose. Bread, if the oven stays hot, the bread takes about an hour to bake. I don't know what temperature it is. We use a wood stove where we don't really know what the temperature is, but it's fairly hot. Once the bread is cooked, we take it out. See, these loaves are nice and brown on top. You also see when they come out of the tins, they're nice and brown on the bottom too. Not as brown, but you know that they're okay. You can give them a bit of a pat to see if they sound hollow. Once they're cooked, it's better with bread to leave it for half an hour to cool off before you cut it. Otherwise, it'll stick and crush the loaf a bit. This is the loaves have cooled off now, and you can see the texture that we get. It's quite heavy, but still full of small bubbles. This is strong, heavy bread that's very durable. It doesn't dry out very easily. It can last a few days while you eat it. There you go. Wheat, water, bit of salt and a few seeds, and there's your bread.